What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JBsports back again with another one. The WBO, World Boxing Organization, has recently updated their rankings. And the welterweight division is what piqued my interest. They did it a couple of days ago, updated their rankings. You know, they have Crawford as their champion, who is on a knockout streak. I think a 6-fight knockout streak, which, if I'm not mistaken, dates back to when he was in the junior welterweight division. He was a WBO undisputed welterweight champion. Now, previously, the number one contender for the WBO strap was Shawn Showtime Porter. And the number two contender was Vergil Ortiz Jr. I guess based on his win over Maurice Hooker, who got injured in that fight, and that fight was very competitive, and he got the win over Maurice Hooker in a backyard brawl, both guys from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The fight took place in Dickens Arena in Fort Worth, Texas, in front of a pro Vergil Ortiz crowd. He was able to catapult past Shawn Showtime Porter based on that victory. And I guess based on Shawn Showtime Porter beating the IBO previous title holder in Sebastian Formella. Based on that last performance, I guess the WBO jumped up Vergil Ortiz because he beat a more credible opponent in his last fight than Shawn Showtime Porter. But it shouldn't just be based on his last fight. Due to the pandemic, you know, they had to, people had to fight fights maybe they didn't want to fight. Shawn Showtime Porter was trying to stay active during the pandemic, and he chose to take a lesser nondescript opponent when he couldn't get the top fighters in the welterweight division. But you look at what Shawn Showtime Porter has done in the welterweight division. Before that, he lost a very close and competitive fight to Errol Spence Jr., which was a unification fight. And if he wasn't dropped in that 11th round, maybe he wins that fight. Even getting dropped in the 11th round, he still lost a split decision to Errol Spence Jr. So one judge had Shawn Porter winning that fight. Before that, he defeated Yordenis Ugas, who is the WBA welterweight champion. And before that, he defeated Danny Garcia, who held belts in the junior welterweight division and who was the current WBC welterweight champion at that time when he defeated Robert Guerrero. So you look at his track record and his past accomplishments, there's no way in hell he should have got jumped by Vergil Ortiz based on Vergil Ortiz beating Maurice Hooker Jr., who had just made his debut in the welterweight division. But I kind of was seeing the handwriting on the wall before the fight went down between Hooker and Ortiz, because all of a sudden when he announced he was going to 147, he got ranked in multiple organizations. He was not only ranked in the WBO, but I believe he was ranked in the WBC in the top 10, top 15. It was the top 10, definitely. He was ranked in the WBC, and he was ranked in the WBO, and he might even been ranked in one of those other organizations. You know, it's 4 top-level organizations, the WBA, WBC, WBO, and IBF. And he was at least ranked in the top 10 in 2 of those organizations. He hadn't even had a fight in the welterweight division. So they were setting the stage right there to, if Vergil Ortiz got the victory, he would catapult past Shawn Showtime Porter. Now, Shawn Showtime Porter dropped the ball, ladies and gentlemen, because when he was number one, he should have enforced the mandatory. He should have got up on his soapbox and enforced the mandatory. Got the fight done with Crawford. Put the pressure on the WBO. But I don't think he wanted to try to enforce the mandatory, because he knew if he enforced the mandatory, it would have been a 75-25 split in favor of Crawford. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to kind of work behind the scenes, talk with his good buddy, his good friend, his ace boom cool Crawford, and try to get a deal done, because he felt this fight was one of the most exciting fights that could potentially be made in boxing, and it could be on pay-per-view. Both guys have a fan-friendly style of fighting, and he thought the fight could sell, you know, similar to how him and Errol Spence Jr. did a successful pay-per-view on Fox. But Bob Arum, a.k.a. the Ball Father, Crawford's promoter, when this fight first got rumored to be happening, said that, look, you know, I'll pay Shawn Showtime Porter $1 million. He said that on Barbershop Conversation. I'll give him $1 million to fight Crawford. You know, we're in the pandemic. You know, this fight is not a fight that's going to sell to the casual fans, but He's the number 1 contender, and I give him $1 million to come fight on the ESPN platform. And then later on, he was willing to double that to $2 million. But that seems to still be out of the price range of what Shawn Showtime Porter was looking for. Now, I think he got a $2 or $3 million guaranteed minimum to fight Errol Spence Jr., and then he made some money on the back end of the pay-per-view, which was successful, and he made around in the neighborhood of $5 million for the Errol Spence Jr. fight, and that's what he was looking to make against Terrence Bud Crawford, either $5 million or somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 million. And Bob Arum was not willing to meet those demands. So what Bob Arum did was got on the phone, in my opinion. This is what I think happened. He got on the phone with the WBO president and had a discussion, had a conversation with the WBO president, and when you see what happened and you saw what transpired, Vergil Ortiz jumped to number 1. Shawn Showtime Porter jumped to number 2. Now, Terrence Bud Crawford said at the Hooker versus Ortiz fight that once Ortiz won the fight and he kind of called him out in the post-fight press conference, Terrence Bud Crawford said after that fight, and he was saying a lot of it before the fight, but he said specifically after that fight that that fight's not ready yet. Vergil Ortiz Jr. is too green. He's wet behind the ears. He's not ready for that fight. He need to fight Igor Kavalauskas, the guy that I knocked out in the 9th round, but hurt me earlier in that fight. Maybe it was the 2nd round, and a lot of people thought it should have been a knockdown. Fight him. Defeat him. Beat a credible opponent, and then maybe I'll entertain a fight with you. So he don't seem to be interested in that fight. He's looking for the bigger fish. Now, he's been fishing and throwing that bait out, throwing that fishing pole out for the big fish, the big name, Filipino icon Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. But that fight has not come to fruition as the investors in Abu Dhabi has failed to come up with proof of funds. So that fight has failed by the wayside. And now Terrence Crawford is looking for a dance partner. And now he's turned his attention allegedly to Shawn Showtime Porter. But with Shawn Showtime Porter being bumped down to number 2, and with Bob Arum seemingly not willing to pay him the money that he's looking for, that fight seems to be on its way to falling by the wayside. Now, who is Terrence Bud Crawford going to fight next? Maybe he takes on a Jose Cito Lopez, or maybe takes on a Castillo Clayton, wins that fight, and then moves up to the 154 pounds, and immediately calls for and wants and looks for a shot at the undisputed junior middleweight champion, and that will be decided between the winner of WBO junior middleweight champion Brian Castano versus the WBA, IBF, and WBC junior middleweight champion Jamel Lions-Only Charlo, and that fight's going down July 17th on Showtime, and he'll chase that winner. And if that's the case, Shawn Showtime Porter still would be in a good position, as he can fight Vergil Ortiz for the vacant WBO welterweight title. Now, Vergil Ortiz has got a good following, got a strong following. His following is growing by the fight, it seems, as he had a good crowd on hand, a pro Vergil Ortiz crowd on hand at Dickens Arena, a fight that took place basically in his backyard against a fellow hometown fighter in Maurice Hooker, as he won that fight, but had problems, took a lot of shots in that fight. And if it weren't for the injury that Maurice Hooker suffered, who knows what would have happened in that fight. The fight seemed to be twinning more towards Vergil Ortiz Jr. way before Maurice Hooker got hurt. But nevertheless, Maurice Hooker had his moments in that fight, and that fight was a very competitive matchup before the injury. So based on that performance, I don't think Golden Boy Promotions is looking to put him in the ring with Terrence Bud Crawford next. Despite what Oscar De La Hoya said after the fight, to tell Bob Arum the Top Rank to give him a call, he's interested in exploring that matchup. He's not looking to put Vergil Ortiz in the ring with Terrence Bud Crawford, at least not next. They're going to try to grow that brand and grow that brand and build that fan base and get a little bit more experience in that boxing ring. And another thing, would it be moving him up in that prime position as the number 1 contender, and him and Showtime Porter fight for the vacant WBO title? I don't know how it goes with the per rules with a vacant belt, the number 1 against the number 2. Will the number 1 get more of the pie, maybe a 60-40 deal because he's ranked higher than the WBO, or would they split it down 50-50? Either way it go, Vergil Ortiz got the advantage of being a more popular fighter even at this point than Shawn Showtime Porter. Shawn Showtime Porter has been part of a more successful pay-per-view with Errol Spence Jr., but he was the A side and Shawn Porter was the B side. Vergil Ortiz is fighting on the app, but he's putting up good numbers. He's got a Latino following, and that could be a fight that possibly can happen maybe at the end of 2021 or early 2022. I don't see that fight happening next for Vergil Ortiz or Shawn Showtime Porter. Shawn Showtime Porter needs to find an opponent and try to stay active. Maybe he fights a Jose Cito Lopez next, and then looks to fight a rematch with Errol Spence Jr. Or if Terrence Bud Crawford moves up, again fights Vergil Ortiz for the WBO vacant welterweight title. We will see what happens and we will see what transpires. But some interesting news as the WBO, at the behest, in my opinion, of Bob Arum, has catapulted, at the behest of Bob Arum and the influence of Oscar De La Hoya. Both of these guys are working together, working in cahoots, have catapulted Vergil Ortiz over Shawn Showtime Porter, who's a PBC fighter, who's closely affiliated with Al Heyman. And they've done that, and they both put themselves in prime position. Vergil Ortiz, in that case, to fight for a vacant title. And Bob Arum getting rid of that headache, getting rid of that problem, which is Shawn Showtime Porter. And not have to worry about him possibly enforcing a mandatory and going to purse bid, and then him possibly losing out on the purse bid to a Triller or the Zone by proxy of Matchroom Boxing, just like it happened with Teofimo Lopez and George Kambosos. He's got rid of that problem, and he's got the guy that he feels is a more sellable fight, and that's Vergil Ortiz. If Vergil Ortiz is not ready, and Terrence Bud Crawford contract runs out in October, and he moves up to the 154 pounds, that still sets the stage for Vergil Ortiz Jr. versus Shawn Showtime Porter, WBO title, vacant WBO welterweight title. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. Let me know your thoughts about the WBO flip-flop in these rankings. Do you agree with this? Or do you think it's a bunch of BS? It's a bunch of conspiracy. It's a bunch of top dogs at Golden Boy and Top Rank throwing their weight around. Throwing their weight around. The WBO and the WBO basically bending over with no Vaseline and taking it and conceding to their demands. Basically what happened, and pushing Shawn Showtime Porter out of that #1 position and leaving him with basically no leverage in a potential fight with Terrence Bud Crawford, and putting up their future cash cow with Vergil Ortiz, who they believe is going to be the next great Latino fighter that follow in the footsteps of Oscar De La Hoya and a Canelo Alvarez. Let me know your thoughts and hit the like button if you like the content of this video, and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend, and I'll holla.